So, as you know, the main thing I wanted to talk to you about today is tariffs. It's a great big controversial thing, and of course, it's one of the biggest things Trump wants to do. And we've got people saying it's going. Well, we got a lot of people praising it, which is good, including me and you. And but a lot of people are calling it the devil, and it's gonna wipe us out, and all that. And my big point is, for one thing, it's as American as apple pie. It's what we have been doing. It's what the enemies of our country since the beginning always did not want us to do.
Hello and welcome to Take Control of Your Liberty with Scott Tregurtha, where we help critical thinkers by giving you the most true and accurate information we can find, which they should be giving you on mainstream media, but are not. So you can decide for yourself and take control of your liberty, your freedom, and your future. And now, here is Scott Tregurtha.
Hello, everybody. Please welcome back Ben Deniston, the president of Promethean Action. He's going to help enlighten us on a very hot subject that we as citizens should really know more about, and that is the subject of tariffs. Ben and his organization have been studying and educating the public on our national and world economy, as well as viable energy sources, the Constitution, and making America great again for many years. And more recently, Trump, as he has now created Making America Great Again into a much needed movement. So without further ado, let's join the discussion. Hey, Ben, welcome back to Take Control of Your Liberty.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me on again.
Cool. Yeah, glad to have you. So, um, as you know, the main thing I wanted to talk to you about today is tariffs. You know, it's a great big controversial thing, and of course, it's one of the biggest things Trump wants to do. And we've got people saying it's going. Well, we got a lot of people praising it, um, which is good, including me and you. And but a lot of people are calling it the devil, and it's gonna wipe us out, and all that. And my big point is, for one thing, it's as American as apple pie. It's what we have been doing. Um, it's what people who it's what the enemies of our country since the beginning always did not want us to do. So it's the same people. They just changed, well, same attitude, just changed names and faces. But so anyway, I guess I wanted to start out with, can you like give us a little history of how we started with tariffs in the US and how they were successful and so on, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, first, I'd just say I think this is spectacular. This discussion is happening now. I mean, this was like you kind of hinted at. This was like, this is like stuff you were not even allowed to talk about 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Well, I guess, before Trump's first term. So it's just incredibly important that this is on the table again. It's an open discussion. And like you said, I mean, we wouldn't, I mean, people got to realize we wouldn't have a country right now if we didn't have a tariff policy early in our history as a nation, right? That's how we built our country throughout the 19th century, throughout the 1800s. We use tariffs, the other dirty word that, modern neoliberal economics equates to, satanic talk is protectionism, right? That's how we created a nation, and you can have all these like, I don't know, general theoretical free trade arguments about optimal market activity and, letting the markets work themselves out. But, any rational person today that looks at the world realizes there's forces out there, globalist forces that don't want nations to develop their own resources, to develop as sovereign economic powers. that challenge other global forces, right? I mean, you got to be in historical reality. So, obviously, our history, we fought against the British Empire, right? And that they developed free trade, right? The whole Adam Smith doctrine. Adam Smith was an agent of the British Empire. He worked with
Right.
them directly, you know, and they would do things like if a country was beginning to develop a steel industry, they would dump what they would you would call dump cheap steel into that country, meaning they'd be willing to sell steel at a loss to make it incredibly cheap in the country that's trying to develop their own domestic steel industry, bankrupt any startup companies that are trying to develop steel in that country, and then once all the competition's wiped out, then they jack the prices back up, right? Historical that's just history, right? So the only way we could develop manufacturing, steel production, any kind of manufacturing industrial base was with a protectionist policy. It wouldn't have existed if we hadn't had tariffs and other protectionist measures, credit, national banking policies, various other actions to ensure that we as a sovereign nation said, hey, we should be able to produce things here. We should be able to produce the things that we need here, and we should take the measures that are needed to ensure that that's able to that's able to happen. So that's the history of this country. That's the history of any country that's developed. Really, has had some kind of policy along those lines.
Got it. Um, and really did not, Alexander Hamilton have something to do with starting tariffs?
Absolutely, yeah. I don't know the whole history. I don't know like when tariffs were very first used, but Hamilton was a economic genius who played a vital role in the foundation of our country and the initiation of the economic policies that really built our country. And yeah, he was a big proponent of tariffs. That was part of it. And he had some uh, s- very well thought out, profound arguments. If you look at like he had this a very long report he wrote to the Congress called "Report on the Subject of Manufacturers," where there was a debate whether, at the time, do we want to remain an predominantly agricultural nation? Do we want to develop manufacturing and industrial production? And, he weighed into that very famously at the time, and argued that, any serious developing country needs, and it's not one or the other. Having a manufacturing and industrial base is, is important to help agricultural production, help farming, and so on. So it's not a one or the other, but any nation that's going to develop needs to have a manufacturing policy to ensure that you can produce things in your country that you need. Um, that's not even just, even just a national security perspective is enough of an argument on that. But beyond that, that's what helps your economy grow and develop and become more profitable. And tariffs are a way to ensure that you can do that, that you protect the industries that are being developed in your country, that, uh, any attempt to, undercut your domestic production in key areas, you add a tariff to make sure that your industries are allowed to and able to flourish and develop and establish themselves. And that ends up being a net positive for the economy because your economy is more productive. You have good manufacturing jobs that pay well, and you actually have physical productivity, which is good for the economy. Which, all these arguments about tariffs making things more expensive are really silly because you're actually ensuring that your kind of economy overall is more productive, is producing more wealth. So that dramatically offsets the whole argument about cheap goods. We should just get stuff the cheapest it could possibly be. That whole argument is just kind of silly because what you end up having is just, what people often call a race to the bottom, right?
Right.
Who can produce stuff the cheapest, right? Since when are we advocate? I mean, what's the logical extrapolation of that? Slavery, right? I mean, that's That's the end goal of a race to the bottom, right? Just employ human beings in the with, paying them basically nothing, just whatever's needed to keep them alive to get them to produce, right?
Right.
How is that a good economic policy, right?
Well, the way some people have looked at it is, well, I mean, it's not in their face if that's going on. Like,
Right.
the
Right.
slavery's happening over in
Right.
China or something, right?
Yes. Right.
Not
Exactly.
here.
Right.
I mean, the only
So if
thing
you're
we're
not
facing here.
faced with it personally, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the only thing we're faced with here is everybody's out of work 'cause, we're shipping it all somewhere else, so
Right.
yeah, but at least we're not doing slave labor. Um, we're,
Right.
being supported by the government or whatever.
Right. Right.
Um, but, at least we don't have slave labor here.
Right.
But it would be good to have labor, period, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so that and it seems like, you mentioned we have a 5 years ago or so, if you couldn't even talk about it.
Yeah.
To tell you the truth, I didn't even know to talk about it 5
Right.
years ago. I didn't
Right.
even think of it. The word tariff, I had to look up in the dictionary, you know?
Right.
But since I've been getting educated on it, I've come to find there are different kinds of tariffs, and I'm starting to see that Trump is using different kinds. He's not calling them that, but, like and I have had some, um, what I was gonna say, oh, libertarians, yeah. Say, well, revenue tariffs are good, but protectionist tariffs are not. And I didn't have time to I have not had yet have time to ask them what they're talking about there. But personally, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like protectionist tariffs are like when Trump is saying, well, we're gonna put tariffs on your stuff unless you make it over here. Like, to me, that's protectionist, right? It's protecting our manufacturers over here, correct?
Yeah. So I mean, the libertarian traditional libertarian argument. It's kind of easy to throw people into groups, but
Mhm.
we're in such an interesting time. With the realignment of the political system. I hesitate even using these labels too much because
Yeah,
I
because
think,
what's a libertarian, really? I can give
yeah,
you we could bring 10 of them into this room, and each one will have a different concept.
yeah, yeah. I
That's
mean,
for sure. Yeah.
and you got Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr., lifelong Democrats, right now working with the Trump administration, right, and
Right.
you got you know Republican neocons who wear the banner of Republican being really Trump's biggest enemies right now. So
Exactly.
it's like the whole thing is kind of in flux. So it's just, but your traditional libertarian argument, especially if you trace it to like the, um, neoliberal school of economics, which has been big, uh, promoted big time out of Britain and the British Empire and followers of that lineage. Their argument is that the government just shouldn't intervene into the market to play any kind of decisive role. And like I said earlier, it's just you could like theorize that in an empty vacuum outside of my view. The way I look at it is, you could maybe argue that in the context of a vacuum outside of geopolitics and the realities of the global strategic situation. But that's just not reality. You have forces, that are attempting to effectively control and suppress populations and nations and utilize their resources. So you have to look at the role of government in that context. I mean, that's what drives me crazy about some of these libertarian arguments. It's like, you realize for pretty much all of human history, you've had one form of empire or another that's actively used its power, whether the power is direct military power or financial control. It just, for example, right? I was actually trying to write this up, I didn't get around to it. This guy Mark Carney, right?
Oh, yeah.
Who's
Mhm.
now being brought in, unelected, just was installed to lead Canada right now, right? He is a prime example of a British imperial agent, right?
Right.
The operatives of, if you want to call them the globalists, whatever. Um, you know, so he one of the things he was been deployed to do in recent years was to uh, use the control over financial mechanisms, right? Who can get credit, who's able to get loans and all that, right? Control through the banking institutions to tell companies, if you don't go with the zero carbon climate change agenda policies, you ain't getting no loans.
Right.
You ain't getting no credit, right? What is that? And not just like in the UK, globally, right? So here is a person representing a apparatus of power that says if you don't go with our agenda in terms of the climate change stuff, right, which is a whole other subject, right? But if you don't go with our agenda, you can't get financing, right? How does the libertarian world view that, right? I mean, how do you reconcile that with your claims of we just need to have nations not intervene because we want to let the free market be a free market. You have forces out there actively trying to control nations, control populations, impose their agenda. And if we don't use the power of a government, a sovereign nation, to protect ourselves against that, we're going to be wiped out.
Right.
That's how I view it. Right? So, it's like you can argue like, yeah, market competition in certain contexts and scenarios is absolutely necessary. And you want to you don't want to, the obvious, extreme counterexample, protectionism is not the same as communism or complete state control, right? That's not what we're arguing for. Some people try and, make that
Yeah.
analogy or whatever, right? But just to state outright, that's not what we're talking about. What we are talking about is the reality that you got Mark Carneys of the world that are trying to run around the globe and say any company in any country that doesn't follow our diktats for zero carbon, climate change, all this garbage, your company is basically going to get strangled because you can't get money from the international banking institutions, right? We need uh, to utilize the powers of a sovereign government to be able to protect ourselves from that kind of activity. So when I talk about protectionism, that's the context I'm thinking of, right?
Right.
And it's the same thing with manufacturing um, and whatnot right now with the discussions of tariffs, right? We just from a national security standpoint, economics too, and economic growth and prosperity also, but even just from a national security standpoint, we are in horrible shape as a nation because we've outsourced so much of our production and manufacturing, right? We are dependent upon not just other nations, but global supply chains, which are, often controlled and heavily influenced by these international globalist forces, right? For goods that we rely on. People want to, an obvious example that gets passed around, in recent years is how dependent we are in China to produce pharmaceutical um, drugs and precursors to drugs, right? If China just decided to stop selling those to us, we'd be screwed. It would be catastrophic for us, right?
Right.
And that's just one
Yes.
example,
The same with steel and, some other things, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, we protectionism when used correctly with a eye towards the general welfare and the benefit of our nation is incredibly important to ensure that we do have industries here that produce the vital goods that we need, right? And that's just a national security argument. I think it goes beyond that in that a country that does that, that produced like what we've seen, we've kind of gone through, and I think this is finally being discussed openly a little bit. We've gone through the experiment to prove that free trade, this kind of free trade globalization policy, is not good for our economy. Because if you go back 50 years, we had a much larger middle class. You had a situation where your average household could be supported by one job, where one person working in a well-paying middle class job, manufacturing was, much more. much more prominent and paid much better than today's services jobs. That was a realistic scenario. That doesn't exist today. You have a middle class that's been, almost wiped out, and lower classes where, if you're lucky, a wife and a husband both working can sustain your household. For a lot of people, that's not even enough, right? So we've completely wrecked our economy because we shifted from productive physically productive manufacturing. We're actually creating the things that improve people's lives, that keep the economy running, and then and innovating into new technologies to make the whole productive process better. That's what makes the economy grow and it's prosperous and allows you to have the kind of conditions we had, 50 years ago. We shifted over to this, services economy, right? Where we're increasingly employing our people in these services, which services are necessary, but they don't create the actual real growth, real development, real improvement, and we're seeing that in the reality of our economy today. So I think there's a national security argument that's valid and fair, but also actual economic progress and growth is facilitated by ensuring that we have a vibrant, productive industrial manufacturing base that's innovating and developing and developing new technologies and implementing new technologies, right? That's what put us in the position to be the world power we have been. And we've shifted away from that. And we've said, we'll just employ more and more of our people, door dashers, right? Cooking each other's food or Ubering people around. And it's like, yeah, sure, you need some of that. But if that's increasingly what your economy is doing, you're not producing any wealth. You're not producing any transformative effect that increases the ability of your population to live better, right?
Right.
And that's what we need to get back to. And that's what we're seeing, and what's so exciting about the Trump administration is that is that is the background and the context for a lot of the discussion on tariffs, right? There's open discussion of the fact that we used to be your average family used to be able to be supported by a single career or single job. We need to go
Yeah.
back to that, right? That's openly being discussed now. It's openly being discussed, this new generation coming up. This is the first generation that does not have it better off than their parents' generation, right? Throughout all of the history of the United States, that was like kind of an implied, it was like a part of the social expectation, social contract, part of what you expected as being an American is that we were growing, we're developing, we're giving the nation off to the next generation in a better state than it was, before. And we lost that. And I think that's, part of that is directly attributed to these failed economic policies.
Right. And can you, because it's a big part of this, and you've used the word a couple times, and it's very relevant. Can you define free trade?
Oh, I don't know if I can give the official textbook definition off the top of my head, but the general idea is that what gets argued for is you don't have governments intervening in any kind of way to allow companies, individuals to just have their economic activity, um, buying, selling, trading, whatever, just done without any or with as little government intervention as possible.
Right.
I don't know if that satisfies the official textbook
It's
definition, but that's, yeah, generally what yeah.
laissez-faire,
Yes. Right.
hands off. And
Right.
when I was in elementary school back in the '60s, that was taught as the way to go.
Right.
And I thought it made total sense to me. The government keeps its hands off of business.
Yeah.
And one of the favorite, terms or sayings or whatever you wanna call it, I learned as I grew up was, "If you let the government run my business the way they run the government, I'd be out of business," right? So, it's very natural to want the government to keep hands off, right? But, if you have a sane government, which I can see wanting the government to have its hands off because we haven't had an example of a sane government for a long time. But if you have a sane government like we do now, um, then I think you're in good shape. And the other thing about that, yeah, okay, if everything was like you said, let's come, we've got to be realistic about this, right? What's reality? It would be great if everything would just naturally work right, and if everybody just had 100% good morals, everybody was working for the greater good of all mankind and all that, that would be great. But that's not the way it is, and if that's the way it was, we wouldn't have to have laws, we wouldn't have to have locks on doors, nothing. Everybody would just do the right thing. You need some money? Here. No loan processing or any of that, it's like, but it's not that way. So,
Yeah,
we
I think
have to
that's what.
have this,
Yeah, I think
and
that's well said. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. And, Trump stepped in, and he just kinda said, "Thank you all very much for all of your, arguments, and, but they're not making sense. And I don't know what to tell you, but this is what we're gonna do. And,
Yeah, and some of
we
the
are gonna put locks on doors, and we're gonna have agreements, and we are going to stick to them." And, anyway, that's the way I'm looking at it right now. And
absolutely, and and pointing out just some absurdities that again, like you said, like it's amazing. I don't know if it was like intentional suppression of any discussion of these things or just groupthink to the point where it was never even raised. But you know, other countries tariff our stuff, right?
yes,
It's not like it's not happening anywhere in the world and we're the first ones doing it, and it's this weird thing that we're introducing it. Trump often cites, and he's an excellent example. If you go to Germany, do you see Fords, Ford cars driving around? You know,
never.
right? We have BMWs here, right? Germany has tariffs on American automobile sales into Germany, right? And
Right.
then
Yeah,
now it's blasphemous that we talk about tariffs for stuff coming into our country, right?
right.
China uses tariffs. I mean, some of this is just like a little kooky about how like, people are talking about as if this is coming out of nowhere and we're the only one in the world even doing this now, right? So some of it just it's a little silly. And I think it's also a good point about how you reference being taught economics growing up because it was the same thing for me. And the way they teach it, it's like they teach it as if this is as if laissez-faire, free trade, neoliberal economics, like as if that's the way they teach that is like they're teaching gravitation in science or something. It's like this is what economics is, right?
Mm,
They present it as if it's like this de facto definitive, like we've now discovered that this is the way to understand economics and the way it is, and it's just been a bunch of it's a total elimination of any reference to the actual history of the policies that built our country, you know.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And like you
And
said, it's true. We don't want the government stepping in on every single little thing and deciding what companies do on every level, right? But I think, as Trump has made a refrain in his campaign, it's common sense. He's making the
right.
Republican Party the party of common sense, right? You can have like this grand theoretical argument about how the government should never intervene into anything, right? Anybody that's got common sense that says Germany's tariffing us, why can't we tariff them back? That's common sense, right?
Right.
If we if we were to refer reliant on other nations for 90% of our pharmaceuticals and precursors, and we want to potentially do something about that, it's kind of common sense, right?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Like, for example, what happens if, we give up all of our virtually all of our steel manufacturing, and other countries are making it for us, and we have a war with those same countries that are making it for us. Are they gonna supply us with the steel we need for our, tanks and, ships and planes? I don't think so. Uh,
Exactly.
not that I don't want really like thinking war, but I mean, that's just an example, you know? Um,
Well, it's history, you know?
it's
It's
history.
we've been
Yes,
sucked into wars that we didn't wanna be part of, you know? It's
exactly.
yeah.
And, yeah, and I'm in the process of listening to that book, Freedom's Forge,
Mm,
where it goes into how we really had to pull it together to get tons of manufacturing happening here that was not, really. And boy, they pulled it off. That was an amazing story. I think they should make it into a movie, but that's kind of another subject. But now, so so the tariffs are really common sense. Um, Trump came in and just and he's going against a lot of people that are fighting him on it, and the media is really helping in fighting him. And it's making it sound like the poor other countries were doing this. We're the great big bully US. When it turns out, if you really do your research, which I just started doing not long ago when this tariff stuff started getting relevant, other countries have been tariffing the hell out of us for a long time, in large amounts, and we just haven't been thinking with it. Well, Mercedes costs a lot of money because or Um, that's not a good example at all, but, our American cars aren't in all these other countries because they just they don't like American cars.
right.
European cars are really awesome, and American cars are kinda big and piggish and whatever, you know,
Yeah,
and that's not true. The
yeah,
fact is they're tariffing them so much, nobody's gonna can afford to buy them over there.
right.
So, okay, let's get down to brass tacks here because this is what really matters. Who is against this, really? If you go up the food chain,
Mm.
who wants to stop this and why?
Oh, well, I mean,
And I don't mean a specific individual.
let's start listing names. Mark Carney wants to stop it.
It's right.
Mark Carney. I mean, he might be a good. Actually, it might be good to name specific name. I mean, he might be
Yeah.
a good individual to look at to get a
Right.
pedigree of the kind of people that we're fighting against. You know, he basically was installed as a leader of Canada as the direct opposition to Trump and what Trump is trying to do. And
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
he is, at Promethean Action, we often talk about the British Empire or the modern British Empire, the continuation of this. I think it's pretty close to what people tend to call the globalists. But we're putting a little more historical specificity on it. That you had, obviously you had the British Empire historically, but you still had the continuation of a very strong um, uh, imperial style level of control in the city of London and in these related institutions that have evolved out of the British Empire. Um, and these are people and forces that are not, uh, they don't have allegiance to the United Kingdom or Britain or these countries, right? These are people and forces that feel like they want to rule over countries, control countries, suppress their development, ensure they can't develop, wreck them if they are developed, right, and exploit their resources and exploit their populations and control them, right? And this is, that's just history. That's throughout history. You're fighting people like that, right? And so Mark Carney, I think, is an excellent example. He's um, his whole history is fascinating. His rise to power and through the banking institutions, which that's a whole nother side of protectionism and American system policies. Hamilton was big on this, and this is another thing that freaks out your more traditional libertarian side is that if banking and access to money and credit is completely controlled by these globalist forces, right? That's another incredible vulnerability for a country, a nation that's trying to develop, right? Again, the Mark Carney example, right?
Right.
if you are deemed to be, you know, putting out too much carbon dioxide in your industry, if you're doing agriculture, you know, just take maybe a hypothetical, but probably not too far off from what we're seeing now, right? At what point would these international financial institutions, these banks, say, you know what? If you're a farmer raising cows, you won't get a loan. You can't get credit
Right.
because
Uh-huh.
cows release methane and that's a greenhouse gas, and we want to stop that. If you want to raise crickets and make cricket burgers, we'll give you credit. We'll
Right.
give you a loan. We'll give you money, right? That might seem like a hypothetical, but that's not very far off from what these people are trying to do, right? Without a Donald Trump in the United States, I wouldn't be surprised if we were very far from that being the kind of things that your Mark Carneys in the world would try and impose on companies, on farmers, etc. Right?
Right.
That's the kind of thing he was already. That was his major role as the leader of this climate initiative, where they were consolidating the power of banks and financial institutions and telling companies, international companies, but also companies within individual countries, if you don't go along, if we don't give you the right credit, essentially carbon score, right? If we don't deem you to be in line with our climate change agenda policies, you're not going to get financing, right? That's just a way to utilize the control of these globalist institutions to control nations, control populations, right? And so that's, those that's a great example. Our one of our leading authors, Barbara Boyd, has a really nice short summary piece on our website on Mark Carney to give you a good profile of who he is. But he's probably a good, sometimes they say if you want to hit the flock, you aim at the lead duck. He's probably a good lead duck to give you an insight into the real globalist types of forces that we're fighting against. And you have people in the United States, in Wall Street and DC who, at this point have been more aligned to this globalist perspective than the United States. So there's certainly going to be people that we're battling within the United States who have more of an allegiance to that kind of,
Yeah,
globalist
right.
system, right? But it really didn't. It's not really something that originated from the United States that we're fighting against. It's more the legacy of this imperial system, which was established very strongly in uh, with the British Empire in just historically recent times.
Exactly. And in relation to Mark Carney, I mean, and when you talk about the historical with Great Britain, he was president of the Bank of England not that long ago, and the Bank of England is Britain's central bank, which is our equivalent of the Federal Reserve, our Federal Reserve, and that was a big part that was established, I'm not sure how long ago, the Bank of England as their central bank, but it was way back, maybe it was did it start around our American Revolution or before?
Oh, I'm not sure. We could look that up. Yeah, it's a good
But it's
question.
been
I think it's been
forever. It's
around
been
for
a
a long
long, long
time. Yeah, for
time,
sure. Yeah,
and they are a big control point of the British Empire.
absolutely.
They
Yeah,
literally are, and all of the central banks in the US, our Federal Reserve and our equivalents in other countries are modeled after them, and they exert control over them.
exactly.
And that might be a topic for a whole different, discussion, but that is the way it is. And, research will lead one to those conclusions, but
Absolutely. And those institutions are key, like historically and currently, absolutely critical institutions that the globalists use to control populations, control nations, right? If you control money supplies and banking institutions and credit mechanisms, then you have enormous control over entire populations, entire countries, which is why, just to maybe jump around a bit or come full circle, but it's why Hamilton was a major proponent of a national bank,
Right.
right? Not
Mhm.
not because you want the government controlling everything, but because the government is at least, assuming your nation's healthy and functioning properly, it's a representation of the will of the people. Now that itself is a battle, right? You got to try and make sure your representatives are doing what they should be doing and all that, right?
Yeah.
Um, but at least you have a mechanism by which the population is supposed to exert control over who runs your country, and then your country can decide to make sure that you have credit. You have a banking system that provides loans and credit as needed for the growth of your economy, right? If you don't have that, you're just asking the Mark Carneys of the world to make sure that you have money to develop your resources in your country. You know, if they don't want your country to become a rival to them, they say, "F you, we're not going to give you credit for that," and you got nothing, right?
Exactly. And, so
Again,
yes.
go back to the, I don't think we were very far off from the hamburgers and the crickets, right? And
Right.
any farmer that wants to have cattle, you get no credit, nothing. You're strangled off economically. Any farmer that wants to grow crickets for cricket burgers to enforce their just, crazy climate agenda where they want you to eat bugs, they get all the credit. They get all the loans and the financing, the low interest rate loans, right? That's the world. That's your Mark Carney agenda, right?
Right. Now that brings up a question that is maybe not that easy to answer, but and this is what makes it so hard, and this is what people ask. And they've been doing this. When I say they, I mean oligarchs, the British, what have you, from time immemorial have been doing this. I mean, anybody who looks at history is going to see there were always these monarchs in trying to control the whole world and everything that happened under them. And people who revolted against them got in big trouble. Joan of Arc, for example. All right. So, and several presidents have been assassinated who came up against them. Um, so the big question is, why do they want to do this? Why do they want to control us right out of being able? Why do they want to, like, for example, use green energy as a means of snuffing out our production, which would be based on a real energy solution? Why would they want to do this and snuff out our economy? Why?
Oh, I mean, I don't know. You could ask why do criminals wanna be criminals? I don't know. I mean,
Right. Right. But
I think it
that is a big question. And the thing is,
yeah,
what you got to look at is, regardless of what, personally, my opinion is, I think they're paranoid and they're nuts. And they're
yeah,
afraid if they don't control everybody and everything around them, they're going to be done in by them. That's my opinion. But it
yeah,
doesn't matter what my opinion is. They're doing it.
yeah.
They
I
are
mean,
doing it. If you
you know,
check history, they're doing it.
yeah, I mean, I am just indebted to the work of Lyndon LaRouche in outlining the history of this because some of it's just like you gotta study the history and just, clinically diagnose it for what it is, why exactly it started, how, I view it as people that it's their, they view it as their power, their source of power, their source of control, right? Is continuing this type of system by which they've controlled populations and nations, and they want to maintain their position in the world, right?
Right.
Um, so I don't think it's all that complicated from that standpoint. What motivates them to do it? I don't know. And some of it's just I think it's just LaRouche used to talk about often um, the oligarchical system is like a cultural phenomenon. It's their culture. It's what they were raised in an environment where they viewed that to be what they do, right? And then it becomes somewhat self-perpetuating as an ideological view. You see different cultures with their beliefs and how that tends to shape generation after generation, right? I mean, and some of the, yeah, it gets funny because you talk about this today and people say, "Oh, you crazy conspiracy theorists," blah 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 blah. But again, just look at history. Like what motivated the people in the British Isles to willingly, intentionally starve and kill off the Irish,
Right.
right? I mean, that
Yeah.
happened. I mean, there was like, oh, you can read quotes of people in the British Parliament referring to the Irish people as if as monkeys and lower forms of human life, and glad they were dying in mass starvation, right? That's history, right? I mean, that happened, I mean, we could talk about slavery as well. Obviously, you could come up with all kinds of examples of uh, people in power, you know, killing in mass or suppressing, large sections of the population for their own control, their own wealth and power and degenerate fantasy or whatever, right? Um, Unfortunately, that's part of human history. I think overall we've been moving away from that, thankfully, right? And if the United States fulfills its mission, which I think its mission was founded to create institutions of government that could protect nations and allow nations to develop, um, protected from that and in opposition to that type of system, right? The nature of a republican form of government, um, Republican small r, not Republican Party, but the idea
Yes,
of
right.
a government which is not just a vote of the masses, but is a system that's intended to allow the general population to ensure that they have a say in the direction of their country and control over the direction of their country, under the idea that we're trying to improve the lives of everybody in that country, right? A certain social contract and a certain relationship to your own nation in that sense. That's kind of that idea, of that form of government, of institution, is really kind of the direct threat and adversary to this oligarchical system. And you could look at a lot of history through that lens as a battle between those kinds of institutional perspectives.
Right, it's always gone on, and LaRoche has provided a lot of history on that, and, it's not just interesting, it's relevant to what's going on today. The history of that led up to the from the British Empire and empires before them, led up to all the way to present day, and the people that are still doing it now. And, there
Exactly.
and, the problem is most of us haven't learned that history.
Right.
I mean, I learned it from LaRoche and other people after graduating high school, um, and seeing the world and seeing what was being in the military and going to Southeast Asia when the war was supposedly over,
Mhm.
and it wasn't, and, you know, I had to learn, and I think most of us who learned had to learn after formal education and
Yeah.
outside of formal education.
Yeah.
And there, just for anybody who's interested, there are many books written by not only Lyndon LaRoche, but people who uh, work with his philosophy. They're all posted on my website at takecontrolofyourliberty.com, and it's really good study, because I do realize some people, they're listening to this conversation, they may even agree, but they don't necessarily have the background on why, because it can get awful frustrating as to, you hear that we're saying this is going on, but why is it going on? How could it be? And so on. Well, if you learn history, real history, it makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you're featuring those works. Yeah, 'cause, yeah, like you say, it hasn't been taught. A lot of, unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's either been uh, written out of the history books, or just the countervailing views have been put in instead. I think some of it also comes down to really deep. I know, probably getting towards the end of the show, but I think some of it comes down to really deep issues, deep, deep conceptions about the nature of mankind and mankind's place in the universe. That's another very fundamental issue. If you look at a lot of the British, you know, views on these things, this is where you've gotten the development of eugenics and these kind
Right.
of, uh, you know, bottom up, um, hesitate to use the term evolution, it could mean different things in different contexts, but, this view of, mankind is nothing special in the universe, just a random accumulation of atoms and the molecules that happens to be here temporarily. And there's different grades to the levels of human intelligence, and all your racist views and eugenics views. A lot of that originated out of British imperial thought, and what do you know? That ideology is great for supporting an imperial view. I'll tell you that much, right? If you want to mass starve the Irish people, if you can claim scientifically that you are arguing they're a lesser species of human, it's a good way to justify it. Um, and then I think the founding of our country is rooted in a very different tradition of seeing man as made in the image of the Creator,
Right.
in which you have a universe that, in my view, is clearly vectored towards progress and development. And I think human progress and human growth and human expansion is part of the mission that's embedded in that universe. So I think if you want to kind of go to the deepest levels of these different, contrasting views, I think you also see that throughout history as well, these different views of mankind.
And this philosophy they have, the oligarchs, the British, uh, these empire types, it's very regardless of whether it's sane or whether it's easy to believe or what have you, it's extremely important to them. I mean, to the point of, Trump just got his ear shot off almost and almost lost his life. And just look at the presidents that these things happened to: Kennedy, Lincoln, McKinley.
Right.
If you study what was going on there, and this is why history matters, if you study what they were working on at the time, those things they were working on were big threats to these people. They
Exactly.
were working on things that make us more free,
Yep.
period. They just were. If you
Yep.
study it, you'll find out. And I think a
Yeah.
lot
There.
more
There.
people
Yeah.
are catching on to this too.
Yeah. There is a funny pattern of which presidents have either been assassinated or attempted to be assassinated, isn't there? Huh.
Yeah, it was, like, for example, I thought Biden was probably he didn't even need protection.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody that was, a lot of people hated him, but none of us are like these empire types. We wouldn't go out and kill him.
Right.
If he was
Right.
any threat to them, he was totally, he didn't even need protection.
Right.
You know? But somebody like Trump, he needs like a tank around him all the time.
Yeah.
But,
Absolutely.
yeah, so anyway, it's very important to these people, and it's important to the point where they are willing to kill, and they control the entire media or a large part of it. And it's amazing, and they control our education systems and all that. And thankfully, Trump has stepped in, and he can't do it all on his own. But boy, is he's cutting through it with a machete. And I am so happy to see he was the first one in my life that ever really made it this far. I mean,
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
lived
It's
through
incredible.
Kennedy
Yeah.
and Reagan, both of which were shot.
Right.
Uh, and but Trump he surpassed the getting shot part, uh, for now.
By an act of God, if you ask me.
Right, exactly. And, he's climbing over to the other side. He's made it past that, and he's just doing more than any president I've ever seen. And I've gotta hand it to the public. All these things we're talking about right now that I'm talking as if a lot of people don't know and need education. It's true, we all need more education, but we've gotta hand it to our public. They did elect Trump,
Yes.
in the popular vote as well as the electoral. So
And in the face of probably the most aggressive propaganda, defamation, attack campaign against anybody. The
exactly,
American people saw through that. Yeah,
right.
spectacularly, yeah.
and with even more tools uh, propagandize the public than we've ever had before, you
Right.
know? I
Right.
mean,
The
we've got
control,
way
yeah,
more tools for that, social media and so
exactly.
forth, than
Yeah, all that
existed around Kennedy
absolutely, yeah.
or Reagan, so,
Right.
I'd kinda like to end off with, acknowledging the public for, the improvement we've gotten. I think we've come forward quite a bit throughout since, 2015. I'm thankful for Trump for kinda opening the can of worms in front of the public, but I must say, um, LaRoche has been doing it, until he passed, not that long ago. He's been doing it, since before Reagan, and, I've gotta acknowledge him because he is his what he has taught is becoming more and more. I realize not that many he was pretty much kept down by the media quite a bit,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah,
his what he taught is coming out more and more and more, and you can see it in what Trump's doing and what a lot of other people are doing, so, anyway,
very
I just
very
wanna
well said.
acknowledge
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. He was ahead of his time, absolutely. I think a lot of the issues that are now front and center, he was advocating, fighting on viciously for decades. So this is, yeah, this is kind of a vindication of his life's work. You know, it's unfortunate he's not alive to see it, but I think he would be ecstatic to see these fights so much out in the open right now. And I think you're right. Yeah, the American population. I think we just got to keep keep getting people organized and active and fighting. You know, there's a lot of efforts to just demoralize people. Black pill people, you know, is the term. So I think the American people stepped up big time, like you said, got Trump elected, but they need to also continue to back him and continue to give him the support he needs because he's still, you know, fight's not over, right? I mean, we're seeing it day in, day out, right? They're going to keep coming after him, and these are big changes he's trying to push through. And you know, he doesn't have a party that's, you know, fully aligned with him, right? You still have a lot of
Right.
rotten elements in the Republican Party. And unfortunately, the Democrats seem to be so lockstep in their cult formation that, you know, none of them are willing to. It's it's hilarious to see Trump supporting initiatives that Democrats used to support 10 years ago, and then now they call him, you know, Hitler or something when he's doing what they
Yeah.
wanted to do. So anyway, but I think you're absolutely right in turning the light on the American people. They really stepped up.
They did, and I'm very happy about that, and the thing is, it's like now we gotta keep pushing forward. It's not like
Right,
we have it made now just because
right.
Trump made it into the White and so many good things about it, though. He's got a great team around him,
Absolutely.
things like that, but we have to all help. We have to keep our representatives educated,
Yes.
because there's a ton more of them than Trump and his team. And they can easily look at the narrow margin the Republicans have in the Congress and the Senate.
Yes. Yes.
And if you, and you go one little way, you know, you go the wrong way. Well, oh, and the other point I was gonna make is we've got a very narrow margin in the Congress and the Senate. But on the other hand, even out of the margin we have, not all Republicans are for Trump,
Yeah.
right? So we have this slight margin, Republicans over Democrats, but not all the Republicans are on our side either.
Right.
So,
And that's where we need people to keep their pressure on their congressmen. And a lot of these people, you know, the unfortunate reality is a lot of these people on the Republican side that are not necessarily all that good, they know it's political suicide to go against Trump, right? So a
yes.
lot of people kind of toe the line, but they're the ones that you need the pressure on them. Like, make people got to tell them, look, you're not going to get reelected if you turn on this America First MAGA agenda right now, right? And that's where the pressure's got to come.
And that's the kind of thing we've got to do. We got to keep pressure on those kind of people. And in the meantime, it gives us more time to get them truly educated
Yeah,
so we don't have to pressure them.
Yeah.
So more and more people are just voting, on common sense.
Right.
So, all right. Well, thank you. To me, that was a very refreshing conversation, and I think it brought things out in a pretty good light for more people to grab a hold of and think with. Uh, so anything else you want to say before you go? I will be, as I usually do, giving the Promethean actions information at the end and all, but anything you'd like to say to invite people to your discussions and your website and everything?
No, I think we ended off on a really good note. I think people should just take that perspective and get involved, you know, with us. Obviously, I'm with Promethean Action. I'm more than happy to see people involved with us, but if, any other way as well, people really got to be active right now. This
Yes,
this this is a historical this is the time that people read about in history books, right? That things this is the time when big changes can be made and it's not secured. So people should be looking at this time period as a pivotal point in history and when we can get the United States not just back on track, but on a very good path that can shape literally future generations. So exciting
absolutely.
times. Yeah.
So, well, thank you very, very much for coming. And I look forward to more and more people learning learning about what we're discussing here, and helping Trump. And I keep looking forward to the next thing he's going to do.
Right.
So,
Yeah, he's good. He's always good about surprising all of us. Yeah.
all right.
I
Well,
appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Yeah.
yeah, thank you, Ben. Really appreciate you coming, and you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Please remember to like, subscribe, or comment. We really need to hear from you guys. So now you have some history and facts regarding tariffs instead of a bunch of talking points from your favorite news station. Just remember, tariffs are as American as apple pie, but they haven't been used as well as they should have in recent times until Trump came along, because he really cares about this country. And also remember, there are vested interests who want to destroy our nation and strip us of viable and workable economy so they can keep us under their control. So they use their control of the media to make tariffs and everything else Trump does look bad. You can get more information pertaining to the subject of this podcast from the resources tab of our website at takecontrolofyourliberty.com. You can also email me at scott@takecontrolofyourliberty.com in case you have any questions or comments. All my contact information is on the website. I also highly encourage you to visit Ben's organization's website, prometheanaction.com, which is also on my website for further updates. And until next week, remember to take control of your liberty, because you don't want anyone doing that but you. And have some fun while you're at it.